Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And today I'm having Greek yogurt, almond butter, frozen cherries. It's kind of turning into my favorite combination. So, let's talk about stabilizer muscles. And no, this will not be the first or the last time I talk about this, because there's a lot of misconceptions there. And I'll hear people say things like this. I've had a former client who was like, well, I think the dip is the best upper body exercise, like, because there's the best. Because it works so many stabilizers that it causes other growth all through the upper body, which is really ludicrous. And we can make the argument that you can't even do dips. Once you get really strong doing a lot of dips, choose your shoulders up, you can't even do them all the time. And I like dips, but there's a certain strength threshold to where the dips start to suck. It's too much for your shoulders over time, for most people. And we saw that with Mikey, my client Mikey. We used a lot of dips for certain phases of his training to build his chest up. Then he got to a strength level to where they became a problem. We couldn't use them that often anymore. Only maybe 2 weeks at a time, and we'd have to take them back out. So people will say things like this without thinking it through. And I'm not saying that lifts with large amounts of stabilizers can't have specific hypertrophy benefits versus something that is more controlled, such as against a machine, for example. But it's not because the stabilizers grow. It's quite the opposite. Then I'll give you a perfect example. We think of chest pressing. A lot of times we have barbell as kind of a middle ground. We could have hammer strength machines on one end, and we could have dumbbells on the other end of that extreme. In other words, there's a decent number of stabilizers with a bench press, decent number of stabilizers. You go to the machine, a hammer strength machine, a lot of the stabilizers get removed because it's locked into a path. And now you're just working the primary movers. And those primary movers are going to fail at the same rate every time, based upon your weaknesses. That's pretty good if you're doing it primarily for chest growth and maybe delts or triceps secondary. Hey, no problem. Works pretty good. I'm not saying machines don't produce hypertrophy. But then you compare it to a dumbbell. We struggle to stabilize it. And as we get more fatigued, what happens? Well, with any exercise that has more stability involved, as we get more fatigued and certain primary movers start to get more fatigued or parts of a muscle, our form shifts. Well, where does it shift to? It shifts to where the primary movers, or parts of them, because again, different parts of your chest get worked at different positions of incline, decline, grip width, right? It does affect how much upper versus lower chest we're using to a small extent. It could also affect how much delt, how much tricep we're using, right? As we get more fatigued, we will go into advantaged positions to where we have compensatory strength to where the muscles or parts of the muscle that still have muscle fibers available will do more of the work. What does this mean? It means we probably get a little more complete development, not of the stabilizer muscles, but of the primary movers, right? In other words, the more you try to isolate a muscle sometimes, a more complex muscle. A bicep's not complicated. Okay? So I don't want people to think I'm going there. That's why an incline curl works great. There's no real complexity to a bicep. So something like an incline curl can produce maximum bicep growth. It just can. So what ends up happening is that the more we try to isolate a muscle on a slightly bigger movement, potentially the less growth potential we get in that muscle because we're locked into trying to use certain parts of it and certain bar paths and planes with it the same. You may have slightly less growth potential as a result of this. So movements that require more stability actually bring a lot to the table from a hypertrophy perspective for this reason, unless they become dangerous. A back squat that's going to become dangerous. End up hurting your back is fatigue mounts. But that's a different beast, isn't it? I don't ever program those for hypertrophy work. I don't. Even for my competitive powerlifters, we just don't do it. We don't need to. So it has a role, but the stabilizers are not growing from it, because if they did, everyone would just bench press for their biceps. Because you get people who are like, but the stabilizers get worked. Because a stabilizer does some work doesn't mean it's being actually worked. Because what do we think of as working a muscle? That a muscle contracts? No, it's that the muscle contributes to the work. The muscle gets used dynamically, and direct mechanical attention is applied to it at different points in the range of motion in such a way that it gets a training response. Right? Does that happen with the biceps? In other words, do you know anyone out there who only bench presses and built really big biceps doing the bench press with no curls, no chin-ups, no rows, no pull-ups, no lat pull-downs, nothing? I don't know anyone who's done it. But if this stabilizer hypothesis worked, you could build 19-inch arms with the bench press. You build big old biceps. But you don't. In fact, how many powerlifters do we see who don't do overt vertical pulling, they only row, who have elite benches, who don't have biceps because they don't train them? They don't really have big, a lot of them don't. But they're benching monstrous tonnages. If the stabilizers grew, these guys would have big biceps. But they don't have them. They don't have them. So what does this tell you? It tells you the stabilizers don't get a good growth stimulus. We don't count them as muscles being worked. We need to actually work those stabilizers if we want them to grow. Just because they are contributing to stabilizing and they're contracting, it doesn't mean that they're getting mechanical attention applied to them. It doesn't mean that that's happening. That's why you can't build the best abs in the world with a squat. It's why we don't build the best biceps in the world bench pressing. It's why the deadlift isn't the king of hypertrophy exercises. If this stabilizer theory was true, a guy who came in and did nothing but deadlifts could build bodybuilder type size. Why? Because every muscle in the body almost is a very important stabilizer. They can track really hard on a deadlift. You come in and do 5 sets of 10 on a deadlift, and you would hit the minimum effective volume for almost every muscle in your body. You could just go home. Doesn't work that way though, does it? There's some world-class level deadlifters who aren't even that jacked. Because this doesn't work. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.